not his home anymore. Capernaum is now going to be the center of his operations, at least in Galilee. Okay? And that's where he settles, and that's where with the disciples, and he operates in and out of Capernaum when he goes and does things. It takes him another day or two to get up there. It's about 25 miles. And while he's at Capernaum, he calls 4 fishermen. Who are the 4 fishermen? Peter, Andrew, James, and John. All right? Well, didn't he call them already? He did. He's going to call them again because they didn't follow him. This time he says, "Follow me." Okay? Do they follow him? Well, a little while. He ends up having to call them up for a 3rd time. But he calls them now, and he performs 2 miracles at Capernaum. When he's in the synagogue, there's a man who had an unclean spirit, and my notes call it a testifying spirit. I would say that. Because he called him Jesus thou Nazarene. He testified as to who Jesus was. So he did that. He also healed somebody's mother-in-law. Peter's mother. Yes. And this was the first time he went, it's mentioned that he went out all by himself to pray alone. So from Capernaum, which is his center of operation, he's going to go make 3 tours of Galilee. This is the Galilean ministry. He actually spends most of his time, most of his ministry, up there. The first tour, he goes to the synagogues first, and then toward the end of that tour, which is now in the winter of that first year, time is passing by, he goes into the countryside and starts to teach and preach. At this time, he also heals a leper. And then he goes back to Capernaum again. That's about 100 to 120 miles over a period of weeks that he does this during that first tour. So after that, he goes back up to Capernaum, and he heals somebody that's let down through the roof of a house. What was this man's problem? He was bedridden, right? He was paralytic. And so they couldn't bring him to the front door because he's already being plaque. Because just this tour in Galilee, the house was crowded. Okay? He hasn't fed anybody yet. That's when he really gets popular. But they let him down through the roof so that he could heal him. And then he calls another disciple. His name is Levi. Who is Levi? Matthew, right? Matthew. Levi, the tax collector. So after that, it's time for him. This is now the spring to summer of the 2nd year. Time passes quickly because the early Gospels don't cover a whole lot of what he does. We think it does, don't we? But he's still operating around Capernaum during the springtime. And he heals the withered hand. He chooses the rest of the 12 disciples who are called the apostles, right, in the scriptures and the Gospels. And he also does something very famous in Matthew 5-7. What's that? Delivers what? Yes, that's correct. So this was basically real early in his ministry then. And then he performs more miracles. He heals a centurion's servant. He raises a widow's son, the widow of what town? Nain, the widow of Nain. Yeah. And then also casts 7 demons out of a prostitute, which may have been who? Mary, right? Not named in the miracle, But these were kind of categorical. He healed a rich man's son. He raised the dead of a poor woman. And then he helped someone who was just the lowest in society. So he's demonstrating by his healings that he's for everyone. Then he goes on a second tour, another 120, 150 miles. This is during the summertime. And this time he's going city by city in Galilee. Okay? He performs 6 mighty miracles at this time. Calming the sea, remember when they were in the boat? Cast out the legion of demons. The woman that had the issue of blood, that happens during this period. He raises someone else from the dead. You know who that was? Jairus' son. And after that, there's an interesting interlude in the Gospels. He goes down to Jerusalem and comes back, and really we don't really know much of anything else he does down there except the healing of the infirm man at the pool of Bethesda. He goes down there for the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay? And how long did it take him from Capernaum? 5 days down, 5 days back, 170 miles walking, so he could go to the Feast of Tabernacles down there. But he's not ready to actually move into Judea yet, to start preaching and teaching down there yet. So he comes back. He comes back to Galilee, and his third and final tour happens at this time. And this is the winter of actually the second year. The winter of the second year. Right? And this is when he sends out the disciples 2 by 2. Remember that? Okay. I know it's kind of hard to picture this without seeing a map, but you know the lay of the land. We all do, don't we? We know where everything is at, so we can kind of picture that. We get a little bit, I do, when we start talking about getting out of Palestine. We go into the Gentile countries up to the northwest and to the north. But in the spring of the second year, this is spring of AD 31, someone is going to kind of step out of the picture, so to speak. And that is the last prophet under the Old Testament, under the Old Covenant. Who was the last prophet? John the Baptist, right? This is when John the Baptist was beheaded. And this is also when in Bethsaida he feeds the 5,000. This is when he walks on the water in Galilee, Sea of Galilee. It's the same time period, the spring of year 3. We finished year 2, so now it's year 3. Time's passing pretty fast, isn't it? After the 5,000 are fed, he's very popular. They start to follow him everywhere because they want food. But also the miracles have caused him to be famous, and they want to see a miracle too. But then he delivers a certain sermon, and it drives a lot of people away. You all remember what the sermon was? In John 6. What was it,
Marriage.
It was the bread of life sermon. You remember that, where he talks about that you must eat me, and people just thought that was really weird. They didn't understand what he was talking about, and so a lot of people quit following him after that. Right? So we're still in the spring of the year, and it's something kind of unusual happens. It's mentioned in Mark 7 and Matthew 15. Pharisees actually came up from Jerusalem to Galilee to ask him questions, or actually to corner him. They really didn't want to learn anything from him. And that's dealt with in Matthew 15 and Mark 7. But then this is where things get kind of interesting. We're basically over halfway now, but he withdraws with his disciples and they leave Palestine. And they go to the northwest coast. There's a couple of seaports up there that he went to. Do y'all remember the names of them? At least one seaport. I'm not sure about the other one. Tyre. What was the other one? Sidon. Tyre and Sidon. And at Tyre, he meets a Syrophoenician woman. In Mark 7, we read about her, and it has an interaction with her. And then he makes his way across that part of the Decapolis district, and he feeds 4,000. That's when the second miracle of the feeding occurs. Okay? And then at Bethsaida, during the same period, is when he heals the blind man at Bethsaida. This is the one where he spit and made mud or clay and put it on his eyes. And now he turns south to Jerusalem. And things get a little bit interesting now. This is where John really picks up the story. John 7 through 10. He travels down to Jerusalem. It's another 5-day trip, of course. And he's going down this time to the Feast of Tabernacles. This is the second one. And those feasts are handy because you know the time of the year. They always happen at the same time of the year. So this was October of year 3. And when he's there, he forgives the adulterous woman, tells her to go and sin no more. He says something that really gets people fired up. Jesus was good about that. He said, before Abraham was born, what? I am. And so he's coming out more trying to explain more who he was, but that really made the Pharisees angry. He healed a man born blind. He starts with parables, teaching parables. Parable of the Good Shepherd, probably the first one that he gave. He stays for the Feast of Dedication, also known as what? We talked about that in an earlier lesson. Hanukkah, right? And then he withdrew into the Syrian wilderness for a while. But then a very, very interesting thing happened that I had never heard of before. I've heard of the Transfiguration. We all do. Right? But he's got these men now, and a lot of what his ministry was about, and we don't really give him credit for this, is preparing these 12 men to take over when he leaves. Right? We think what he's doing is preaching the gospel. And that's true. He preached it to the people, but he's going to be gone when they have the opportunity to actually be saved of their sins, be baptized, right? And to be added to the church. So he takes these men north. He goes way north. And this is a time for him to be with them and to teach them and to test them even. Somebody, I do have one reading. Somebody volunteered to read Matthew 16, verses 13 through 18. Albert's turning over, so we'll let him do that.
Matthew 16.
Yes, 13 through 18.
When Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it."
Okay. Have you ever wondered what he meant by, well, we have an idea, I guess, but why did he say that about the gates of Hades or the gates of hell? Why did he use that phrase? He's talking about Satan. Yeah, we understand that. Satan is not going to affect the church at all. He can't. He'll be powerless one after the death and resurrection of the Lord. But he says the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. What gates? Has anyone ever heard this story? There's a cave at the base of Mount Hermon. And that's actually where they're at. They've gone north of Caesarea Philippi, which is really close to the base of the mountain. And there's a cave there, and today it's called Banias, B-A-N-I-A-S. What it is it's a cave that goes back and down, and water from the mountain seeps down, and there's like an underground river there. It brings fresh water, and you can collect that water and you can drink it. But the Greeks before, and the Romans after, they thought this place has something to do with their false gods. And the name Banias is an Arabic way of saying the original name Panias, which means the place of pain. Pan was their false god of mischief. And they did despicable and terrible things in this cave. And it got such a reputation that guess what the Jews called the cave? The gates of hell. That was the name of the cave to the Jews. I had never heard this story. Did any of y'all ever heard this? So I think, and from what I can check, is that Jesus was using that name for that cave with them standing there as a visual illustration, so to speak, of what the church would be up against, the evil in the world. But no matter what would happen, and in spite of all the persecution, the church was continued strong and continued to grow through those early years. Okay? But let's talk about what happens next. When they left Jerusalem, they crossed over and went up the eastern road and went pretty much due north to get up there. Jerusalem was about 2,500 feet above sea level. And they went down 3,400 feet to get to Jericho. You've heard scriptures saying a lot when someone went to Jerusalem, they were going up to Jerusalem. And we learned as youngsters, even when they were coming from the north, right? And they were coming south to go to Jerusalem, they were going up to Jerusalem. And that confused me as a boy because I thought they were going up, they were going north. But they were going up because Jerusalem was high. And they went down to Jericho, which was 850 feet below sea level, because that's the way to get to the road to go north. So when they got to Jericho and they started working their way up, then they went back up another 2,000 feet by the time they got to Caesarea Philippi. So not only did they have to walk 110 miles from Jerusalem to Caesarea Philippi, which took them 6 to 8 days to do that, but it was way down and way up. And then after they got there, as tired as they were, after they got there, what did Jesus do? He took 3 of those men, he left the rest of them there, but he took 3 specific men and took them up, not to the top of Mount Hermon, but very high to Mount Hermon, up as high as about 8,000 feet above sea. 6,000 to 8,000 feet.
I think it's important to note too, just as far as geographically, that Mount Hermon, it says on my map, it's 9,200 feet. Sea level, and when you look at all the others, like for example, Mount Carmel, it's only 1,800 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So, we talk about mounts or mountains, or hills for the most part, but Mount Hermon is an imposing thing. I remember going up there, actually got over that grotto of Pan.
Did you?
Pictures on there that are pretty interesting. It's got little niches where the idols of Pan and all would be there right around that grotto.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's I think it's not snow covered, it is north.
Snowcap.
Yeah, Snowcat Mountain. And it was not that time of year for any snow on the ground. So it was
Well, I don't know that too. It's pretty much year round. It's got a snowcap on the top of it. Why, of all the places he could choose to be transfigured for these 3 men, did he choose to go there? Well, you can think of a couple of reasons. He's pretty much getting out of Palestine. He's getting away from the troublemakers. He's wanting private time with his apostles because of what we were talking about a while ago. He's teaching them, he's preparing them. But these 3 men, he broke them down. We got some military servicemen here. And they can tell you that one of the things that they do in basic training is not just to strengthen you. They break you down, they work you so hard that you get so exhausted that when you get to that point, you're amenable to their teaching, aren't you? It's a lot easier for your drill instructor to get through your stubbornness, for example, because he's worked that out of them. And I think that's, from my reading, that's what he was doing to Peter, James, and John. He made them climb all the way up that mountain. It would take about 8 hours to do that. After walking all that distance, and he got them up there, and that's where he was transfigured before them, so that they would have a spiritual experience. And they sure did, didn't they? Because these men were probably the most important men in the church, weren't they, before Saul? I have a lot of time spent on that, but I thought it was very interesting talking about the gates of hell. So after that, he comes back down into Galilee. This is now year 4, and we're in the spring, and he stays in Galilee, but he's a lot more private now. He's not quite as outspoken. He's missed a couple of Passovers, and there's a note that says he might have missed a 4th one here, because do you remember when he paid the temple tax collectors thing and said, "You not pay the tax?" And they said yes, and Jesus gave them money so they could pay the tax. You normally paid that when you went down to Passover. And the temple tax when you got there. If you can't go for whatever reason, there were people who would collect it from you wherever you were at, and they were collecting it from them there. So we all know that there was at least 3 Passovers. He didn't go to all of them, But there may have been a fourth, and that's what that one was about. I thought that was interesting. And he does a lot of private teachings. Matthew 18, Mark 9, talks about lots of things there. But then, after this, is something, have you ever heard the term Luke's travelogue? There's something interesting that happens. In Luke 9:51, it says that he set his face toward Jerusalem. What does that mean? What's that talking about? What is he doing when he set his face toward Jerusalem?
Indicates the third nation.
This is his final trip to, not specifically to Jerusalem, but to Judea, right? He's not going to be going back up to Galilee. But he takes months in what normally would take days to walk down there. Because, like we were talking about before, he's spending a lot of time with his disciples, and he's teaching them as they go. 40% of the Gospel of Luke deals with just this one journey. So it includes a lot of his teachings that he taught along the way. Okay? This was when his disciples asked him to teach us to pray. He talks about the sign of Jonah. And then he starts delivering more parables. The parable of the rich fool, the fruit of the fig tree. Luke 9 all the way through Luke 18. That's 9 chapters in Luke, all have to do with this one trip. From Mount Carmel all the way down. And then when he gets down there and he goes to Bethany, things start to happen that's leading him to his final week. There's a climax in Bethany, which is where Mary and Martha live. What happened to their brother? He got sick and died, right? Jesus knew and delayed his departure so that he could raise him from the dead. Yeah, Jesus has raised people from the dead before, right? But this particular miracle made a really big impact on the people there in Jerusalem. They knew Lazarus, and that had a large part to do with the triumphal entry into the city. Remember when the people met him on the road coming into the city, what did they do? With the palm branches, right? They would throw them down in front of the colt, the donkey, and they sang praises to him, right? Yeah. But he does have one more ministry. He goes beyond the Jordan River in the winter of that last year, because he's looking forward to the spring. The spring is what feast? Not really a feast. It's the Passover, right? And that's when he knows that's why he has to be there. And some have suggested that's why he took so long in that last journey, is because it's all a matter of time. He didn't need to get there too early. It's like we talked about last time, Galatians 4:4. Everything had to be ready for him when he got there. And so it was. But his final traveling ministry was Transjordan. He went into Korea. And Matthew 19, Mark 10 talks about that. Teachings on divorce, Matthew 19. That's when this happened. When that was delivered. Meeting the rich young ruler, that's when that happened. And some parables as well. And even on the Jericho Road, coming back into Jerusalem, he was preaching along the road there. Talk about blind Bartimaeus and parable of the pounds. And then that brings us to the triumphal entry. Now, the triumphal entry is just the last week of his life, basically, right? And it accounts for 1/3 of the 4 Gospels. 25 to 50% of each Gospel is dealing with just this 1 week and the post-resurrection movements of Jesus. Mark and John alone, 40 to 50% of their Gospels is dealing with this 1 week. It's incredible, isn't it? So we were looking earlier in the class, we were talking about his movements. Remember how I talked about time was passing fast? He just get a little bit of things that he was doing. We don't know what all he did. It's a mystery to us. We got just a little bit, but we know a lot about this last week, don't we? Why do the writers of the Gospels and the Holy Spirit spend so much time on this period?
One is the symbol of the history of man.
That's right.
That's the most important thing that's ever happened to mankind.
That's right. When you look to convert somebody, what's going to convert them? These chapters, right? These chapters of the Gospels. That's what's going to convert them. That was my first point. It was the core of Jesus' mission. That's why he came. It was during this time he fulfilled a lot of Old Testament prophecy. We talked about that in the class that we had on prophecy, didn't we? And it was very important because of the eyewitnesses that were also proved. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about all eyewitnesses, 500 at one time after he was raised from the dead. It was also very important for the teaching of new converts. They had to come to know this story and know it well, didn't they? So that's my lesson on the time period of